When I was at law school so many years ago, in fact at the University of Sydney Law School, in its old dilapidated building, not this modern new law school building where I'm recording this statement, I learned a very important lesson, and I share it with you. And that was to be a joiner. That means that you don't just focus on yourself and on your own life and on your own issues, but you focus on a wider community, on the community around you, on the community of your state and your country, and on the world community of human beings everywhere. And this is really what I've played out in my life. I became the president of the Students' Representative Council, later the president of the union at this university, and a member of the Senate elected by the undergraduates. I was a joiner. I got involved. I got engaged. And that is a very good thing that the legal forecast is encouraging in young lawyers. Very important to get engaged, very important to be critical of things you see that are going wrong, and then to contribute in a constructive way to making the things that are wrong better. And one of the tools that is definitely helping in making things better and making us more self-critical is the tool of technology. I mean, when I started, it wasn't all that long since Mr. Barwick, later Sir Garfield Barwick, later the Chief Justice of Australia, made the huge technological leap of taking the telephone from a stand on the wall, which is where everyone thought telephones had to be because that was where they were in public telephone boxes, to take it down and put it on his desk so that he would not be wasting his very valuable time as a barrister getting up and down from his desk, but he would be able to pick up the phone on the desk. And then along came typewriters, and along came the typewriter with the capacity to make amendments to the text. That was a huge invention when it came. And then finally, along came Dr. Wang's invention, the word processor, the amazing phenomenon of seeing words typed out, appearing on a screen and being able to juggle them around. I remember taking, when I was chairman of the Law Reform Commission, the former First Parliamentary Council of Australia. He was the one who did the drafting of the federal legislation, to see a word processor, and how astonished. He broke down in tears because he thought of all those times they'd had to retype every page where there'd been a mistake or a change, and word processors miraculously overcame that. And then along came the computer, and now along has come artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is going to be an enormous assistant to the law in bringing justice to more people, but not without many new problems which people of a younger generation will have to face and solve. Technology can be a great blessing, and all of those things that I've mentioned, and I'd add in there photocopiers, which were a marvellous invention when they came along. All of these are adjuncts to the actual performance of the work of lawyers, but is that performance really at peak value for ordinary people in the community? Because I came from a family which was not wealthy, and because although I had a maximum pass in the Leaving Certificate and came top of the state of New South Wales in history, I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get a job as an article clerk, and all the big firms turned me down. So I want you to remember that when you make your applications to be a summer clerk or a volunteer or some other an employee of the big firms. I want you to remember that even if they turn you down, you may well go on to fame and fortune, and you've just got to keep striving to do so. But Because I was critical of some aspects of the law, I began to examine carefully where the law was breaking down. And my work as a joiner had brought me to be connected, after my university days were over, with the Council for Civil Liberties. The Council for Civil Liberties was a body that stood up for the civil liberties of ordinary Australians when they fell into disagreement and conflict, and sometimes violence, with police or other officials, and they came to the Council for Civil Liberties for pro bono legal assistance. It was wonderful back in those days to see how many of the top lawyers would offer their pro bono assistance, and that was good. It was good because we all know that legal aid in Australia is completely inadequate and doesn't service anything like the number of people who have legal problems, particularly legal problems in the civil courts. Legal problems in the criminal courts have to some extent been resolved in Australia by the very important decision of the High Court of Australia in Dietrich against the Queen. If they don't have the money, if they don't have the wherewithal, it's very difficult for people to get involved in a case, a litigation. And much research that's been done for the legal forecast has shown that most people get involved in what could be a criminal case but simply can't afford to get to justice. When I was chairman of the Law Reform Commission, a very distinguished and very talented judge from Germany came out to Australia. His name was Dr. Zeidler. He was the president of the German Constitutional Court. And he gave a paper to a law conference in Hobart, and he spoke perfect English. And he said, "You have a wonderful system of law and justice in Australia. It's absolutely wonderful. I really admire your system. It is a Rolls-Royce system of justice. In Germany," he said, "we've only got a Volkswagen." But then he paused and he asked, "And how many people can afford a Rolls-Royce, and how many people can afford a Volkswagen?" And that put his finger on what is a fundamental problem of our legal system. If you can get to the top court, if you can get to your case to court at all, if you can get before a tribunal, if you've got a lawyer to represent you, if you can afford to pay for all this, then you'll get a pretty good standard of justice. But if you can't afford that, then it's a different kettle of fish. And that's why the advent of new technology is going to address what is, I've always thought, the fundamental problem of our legal system: access to justice. Access to justice, access to the law, access to courts. These are the really difficult aspects of the Australian legal system. And the hope, I think, is that with artificial intelligence, it will allow access to platforms on which people without means will be able to interrogate computers, and they'll be able to get accurate statements of where to find the law, what the law says, what the law text, if it's a statute, says, what the Constitution says, if it's relevant to the problem, or what the common law and the judges have said about cases similar. And all of this can, at least theoretically, be delivered quite cheaply to ordinary people. And if that happens, that will be a very good thing for access to justice and a very good thing for ordinary people. And similarly, we have to be ensured that the system that is examined and ultimately delivered on the cell phone to the ordinary citizen makes allowance for access to justice, but also makes allowance for the need to go beyond the automatic replication of the old decisions. You can repeat the old decisions and repeat them uncritically. But if we had done that, would the High Court have come to the decision in the Communist Party case, which overruled the legislation that sought to ban the Communist Party and to impose civil burdens on individual citizens of Australia simply because they believed in communism? In fact, the High Court in that great case in 1951, when I was a youth, said that there was plenty of opportunity in the law to deal with communists for what they do, but for what they believe, that was a zone where the law did not go further. And query whether that would have been the decision that the algorithms would have delivered if there hadn't been an input of human wisdom and the human desire for justice that is a special feature of our species. Likewise with Mabo. We all know the great decision of Mabo. In 1992, 175 Commonwealth Law Reports at page 1. I know that off by heart because it's a very important case for all Australians, not just for Aboriginals. That was the decision that overturned the rulings of the 19th century that denied Aboriginal people access to their land rights. And when the decision came before real live justices in the High Court, and this was before my time in the High Court, the decision was taken to overturn that precedent. It would have been very easy, and the algorithms would have delivered the continuation of a very old principle affecting land law. That would not have been a big surprise. But in fact, a human decision in the quest for justice, which is always the noblest principle in our legal system, interposed, and that led to the decision which we all honour today in Mabo against Queensland number 2. So all of this really goes to show we are going in the generations ahead to address the fundamental flaw in our legal system, and that is it is very cost ineffective, it is very expensive, it is very costly to get access to justice, and many Australians, probably most Australians, if they have a legal problem, simply cannot afford to pay for lawyers to get there. And therefore, if artificial intelligence brings into the law a better access to justice, then that is going to be a very good thing for law and for justice. Now, as to lawyers, lawyers will have to find their own place in the sun in the new times. But the story that I've told you about the Communist Party case and the Mabo case, and I could give you many other such cases, including some of the glorious cases in which I sat and decided in the High Court. It requires the human desire for justice, for kindness and for equality and for social equity for all people, including people who are not the same as oneself. And these are the features of artificial intelligence that need ethical principles, a good programming that is conscious of the biases of the law and of society, and particularly conscious of the fact if I go to a computing conference to speak to them about privacy, which I have known something about for many years, the whole show is basically men. And therefore the values can sometimes be very patriarchal. And it's very important for those who want to disrupt the law in a nice possible way to also be alert to the need to sometimes question what artificial intelligence will bring. So I offer my very best regards to everyone who's involved in this project. Be a joiner, be disruptive carefully, and also be self-critical, be critical of society as it is, and be optimistic that by your life and by your efforts as a lawyer, you can contribute to a better community, a better country, and a better world.